Take 3. Okay, let's get into this. I've talked about Houston before, and I try not to talk too much about it because we don't know what's going to happen, right? We don't know that there's going to be a team. Now my review last night apparently broke some Buffalo Sabres fans, so I'm just going to go ahead and leave that where it is. And I'm going to try my best not to needle anybody who's really into the Houston NHL thing. I've discussed it before. May 17th, Jacobs opened his mouth and said, we really want Houston, we don't want Quebec, which triggered some Quebec people. Seattle, Houston, Houston serious, Seattle, Houston, Houston likely. I've talked about Houston a grand total of 6 times since September 7th of last year. So this is number 7. And again, I try not to do too much and I wait till something's added to it. So what I'm doing with this one, I'm going to go ahead and collect everything together. I'm going to go ahead and just collect the whole thing together and just give you guys the picture as I see it. Number 1, it's Jeremy Jacobs. Jeremy Jacobs, every time he talks, people listen because he's considered a very influential owner. When there's a lockout, Jeremy Jacobs is likely one of the owners who said, yeah, the players aren't getting that, and triggered the lockout. For everybody who wants to hate on Bettman, I'm telling you, there's about 22 or 23 owners you guys really should be mad at, too. I'm not saying Bettman's completely innocent in this, but Bettman answers to the owners, and the owners are the ones saying, yeah, we're going to go ahead and lock the players out because we're billionaires, so if we don't play this year, it doesn't really hurt us. But point 2 on the board, he's not wrong. Houston's a huge market. I really believe it would support the NHL. But there's something interesting in this because people look at Seattle and they go, well, that's team number 32, so that's it. I don't know. So Jacobs did mention this in May as well, which is point 3. And he said, Houston's this great market and Quebec City isn't. That's basically what he said. And he said they're challenged. I'm putting that in nice way. They're challenged, meaning he really doesn't want the NHL going back to Quebec. And this is a problem because you need a certain number of owners to be on board. We all, as fans, can say, hey, we would love to see a team back in Quebec. Gary Bettman himself might say, yeah, I'd love to see a team back in Quebec too. But if a certain number of owners go, no, then it's not happening. And that's just reality, is that all of these other owners in these markets you people hate, I'm not saying you people, not everybody, but there are certain people who say, I can't stand Arizona, Florida, Carolina, move them all. Well, they all have a say. They all have a say in where other teams go. And as much as we may not agree and whatever, I don't mind. I think it's fine. I think the NHL's fine. And you know who else thinks the NHL's fine? Is Jeremy Jacobs. Now, I think part of the reason is that Tillman Fertitta, Texas billionaire, came in and took over the Houston Rockets and said, yeah, I want an NHL team too. He paid $2.2 billion for the Houston Rockets. This guy's got some money. So the NHL sees a guy who's got money and he's got a really nice building. And you're going to get a sweetheart deal out of that if you go there. And the NHL is probably salivating. At one point last year, Bettman himself goes out to meet with him and meet with the Houston group. This was before Seattle became a slam dunk. This is when Seattle... There was talk of renovating Key Arena, but there was some resistance, and there was question about how they would come up with all the money. Now they've got extra guys on board. Seattle's clearly all set to go. They're going to break ground on the whole revamp of the building, and it's going to change everything for Seattle. But, Houston was really considered a front runner at one point. Now, the other interesting thing about going back to Jeremy Jacobs, Jacobs says all 31 teams are flourishing right now. Every city in the NHL, they're all flourishing. They're doing really well. So, Jeremy Jacobs says the NHL right now is flourishing as it is. We've got all these great cities. He knows Seattle's coming in. So we've got all these great cities. Everything's going really well for all these franchises. Because while we may look and see an empty arena, all they're looking at as owners is, do you turn a profit? Yeah, you're turning a profit. We're fine. So that's the end all be all at the end of the day. And I do believe that owners cook the books a little bit, so it looks like they're losing a lot of money that they're not. So he's saying all the cities are flourishing, and when asked if he was asked directly, and the article didn't exactly say whether he was asked directly, it just said that he wouldn't clarify whether it was going to be expansion or relocation. Well, if he's saying relocation is not really a consideration because everybody's doing well, that means expansion. And point 6, there's 650 million reasons why the NHL would love expansion money. We talk about how there's 32 teams. That the lid for how many teams you can have in a league is 32, right? The The NFL 32. Major League Baseball wouldn't go beyond 32. You can't go beyond 32. My answer to that is, why not? There's Now I understand a need, and I understand people who say you need to contract. Remember when the league was 25 or 26 teams? Remember when they had 21 teams? That was great, right? And when I was a kid, I remember hearing people say the NHL was best when it was an original 6. We need to go back to that. I do remember people telling me that the 21 team league was really watered down and it was a crappy product compared to when it was original 6, and that was when the product was great. We are always going to hear people saying that expansion and adding teams will water down the league. Does it? Maybe. I think there's enough people playing hockey around the world that we can fill a 40-team league if it gets there. But $650 million, that's a lot of money. And this guy here is definitely going to pay that money if he has to. And then the other thing is, so let's say we go to 33, then you got Kansas City, Quebec, Portland, Milwaukee, and ... because there's other locations as well. There are places that will support hockey. And I've talked about expansion and relocation. I've done this a few times. Houston is a clear option as step A. And again, if he's saying all these cities are flourishing and I really like Houston, then he's saying he believes Houston will flourish as well. Point 8, March 13th of 1998, the Oilers almost got moved to Houston. 9 hours before the city of Edmonton would have lost the Edmonton Oilers to Houston, local ownership stepped up and said, all right, we'll do it. We'll take over. If not for that local ownership group, they probably would have moved to Houston. The NHL had not blocked moves to Colorado. They had or Phoenix. They weren't going to block Houston. And again, that's a WHA team. Bettman had said the problem with the NHL was spelled with 3 letters, WHA. And of course, Hartford as well. But I'm talking about the Canadian teams here too. Quebec, Winnipeg, Edmonton. Canadians, the dollar was really low, and Canadian teams were just moving out. So it was saved. But Houston really had a desire for a team. And the NHL was quietly okay with it. Even though there were payments being made to Canadian teams to try to even out the money. I mean, if an NHL team was going to be moved to the south and to a potentially flourishing market like Houston, I don't think the NHL would have fought it very hard. Step 9 here, or point 9. The WHA Arrows almost merged with the NHL, and I discussed this before. This was a video I did as well. When the Houston Aeros realized the WHA was a sinking ship, and let's just go to the NHL. Let's just say screw it. We're just going to leave the WHA. We're just going to go to the NHL on our own. And it almost happened, and the NHL decided, nah, let's just leave them in that floundering league. When they're on their knees, we'll allow them into the league. So Houston understood, and Houston ownership understood then too that it was a sinking ship with the WHA. So when that failed, point 10 here, the Arrows owner at the time tried buying the Cleveland Barons. So they looked and they went, okay, we can't get into the league as an expansion team or merged from WHA. What if I buy the Cleveland Barons and move them to Houston? The Barons were dying. And the NHL answered with, we're going to merge Cleveland with Minnesota. And the Cleveland Barons merged with the Minnesota North Stars rather than get moved to Houston. And I kind of understand the NHL's point of view on this, because it was, well, we've tried it in a couple locations. It didn't work in Oakland. It's not working in Cleveland. We don't want to move to Houston and end up in the same issue. Even though I don't think they would have had that same issue, but I think they realized this franchise, we're just going to merge it and forget about it. And then, of course, it became the San Jose Sharks as we know them now. Actually, no, I'll use this one because that one's off camera. But they became the San Jose Sharks as we know them now. And, they tried. And then when the NHL merged with the WHA, Houston was left on its own. They're like, we don't want Houston. So it's a weird relationship between the city and the NHL. Point 11 that I wanted to make is that Houston strongly supported the Arrows, who were in the AHL at the end, but they started out in the International Hockey League. And it was a lease dispute, which led to the Minnesota Wild saying, that's it, we're going to move the farm team to Iowa. It was not fan support or a lack thereof that caused the team to get moved out of Houston. So the Houston Aeros, which was their team in the American League, did well for attendance. It was a lease issue. They won't have that problem now. Because, yeah, this guy, the owner here, the guy with all that money, that won't be a problem. So Houston's kind of got gypped out of hockey on a couple of occasions. I wanted to make point 12 here, which is the Gordie Howe connection. Gordie Howe played for the Houston Aeros. We talk about the Hartford Whalers, rightfully so. He played for the New England Whalers in the WHA. But it was the Houston Aeros that had him and his sons playing for them at one point. So there is reason to look at that and say, okay, so there is an NHL, at the very least, a hockey grassroots in Houston, where they've been connected to hockey before. This isn't like going into Arizona, Phoenix, where there was basically nothing. You had some spotty International and American Hockey League franchises, and then here goes the Coyotes into the great unknown. There's more of a long history of hockey with Houston, and it can work. But the last point I wanted to make is this. Jacobs is the chairman of the Board of Governors. So I'll come right back to Jeremy Jacobs again. While we may look and go, he's just spouting off, he is the chairman of the Board of Governors. He is the guy who's going to be sitting there listening to the pitch from the Seattle ownership group, and he's going to be saying yay or nay to that. We know it's probably going to be yay. I can't imagine a situation where Seattle doesn't get the team. But he also would be the guy who puts the ball in motion, potentially, for Houston. He is the guy who could be in the ear of Gary Bettman's and saying, we really need Houston. So while we can look at Jeremy Jacobs and say, well, he's this hard-ass owner and he's one guy. And that's what Bettman said when he caused all that controversy back in May, saying Quebec's too small a market, they're challenged. He's the one that said, hey, Jacobs is just one owner. True, but he's also very influential, and he is a guy that the NHL will listen to, because they kind of have to, with him being the chairman of the Board of Governors. I don't know how much has changed with him saying this, but I do know that for people who want the NHL in Houston, and there is a group of people who definitely want a hockey team in Houston, an NHL-level hockey team, there's money to be made. And where there's money to be made, you will see owners like Jacobs, and there are others who say, hey, we could make $650 million over here. Or X team has lost $50 million this year. They could make $100 million a year in Houston. We need to consider making a move. So there you go. Trying to summarize, the Houston thing is tricky. I hope I've done it justice. Let me know your thoughts in the comment section below, as always. Don't forget to hit like and subscribe if you're browsing your way through. You just happened upon this video. Thank you guys so much for watching. I'll talk to you again soon.